Well, there's that image of sour grapes with everybody with their teeth on edge. Let's just all think about that for a minute and then move on. So my experience of this congregation is that you're people who understand and care for the concept of covenant, meaning making agreement between people, coming to an agreement about something. You understand that we ask members of this church to be faithful with their prayers, their presence, their gifts, their service, and their witness. And a few years ago, when you made a plan to renovate this church building, you had a campaign, and people here generously and graciously made a pledge to support the building campaign. And then many of you followed through on that pledge as a covenant that needed to be fulfilled. We know that sometimes anything could happen with a commitment we make that means we need to change it. But overall, the result is a beautifully renovated building, which we wouldn't have without you fulfilling the covenant that you made, each and every one of you. The very act of updating the building and making this the best facility possible for our ministry is also a fulfillment of covenant with doing ministry in this place on God's behalf. Several congregations have come together here as one to fulfill a covenant made with God to do God's ministry together. It wouldn't have happened without your commitment. So let's think about this for a minute now. Merging congregations, then doing a building campaign, and then surviving a pandemic. Those are all really big things you've done in the last decade. Wow. That's a lot of big things in a relatively short amount of time. A lot has happened. So now we need to discern what it is that God calls us to do next. What will our ministry in the next few decades look like, and how will we support that ministry? This building is ready for whatever we do next. But our next step in ministry is about what takes place in this building and how we minister to the community all around us. And now's the time to figure that out. We have help from the book of Jeremiah. Those are words in the book of Jeremiah from the prophet as recorded by his scribe Baruch. They're the reflections from Jeremiah about being a servant of God. I think we even have a picture of what somebody thought Jeremiah looked like, if we get that moved along there one of these days. The first chapters of the book of Jeremiah are written to warn the people of Judah to keep their covenant with God and not worship other gods. But their repeated disobedience led to God's judgment. So by mid-book in Jeremiah, the message is about judgment of the leaders of Judah, that country of God's people. In that message of judgment, they're acknowledging that the Babylonians, their enemies, destroyed Jerusalem and the temple at which they worshiped. And Jeremiah tells the people of Judah that happened because they were unfaithful. Their leaders were carried away to be held in exile in Babylon, and the book in Scripture names their defeat and the destruction of their land as a result of their disobedience. And then Jeremiah acknowledges that the people feel despair. They've lost life as they knew it. And then we get to chapter 31 where everything changes. The time comes to make a new covenant with God. Because it's in this chapter that the prophet's message changes. The prophet's been consistently saying that children will pay for the sins of sons and daughters. And the new message becomes, the Lord will make a new community different than the one before, different than the one in the past. The reality of sin is acknowledged, but it is to be remembered no more when all the people are forgiven. That's a glimpse for the future for any of us. And we'll never know from the distance of time whether those words were written to provide encouragement for the people of Judah who knew that they were going to be liberated and it was a promise to lift their spirits, or whether it's when that was actually happening and they were on their way home at last. But the message in this part of Jeremiah was to give people hope for their new beginnings as God's people. The time had come to make a new covenant with God. And God forgives sins so we can start again. God's people back then were invited home to be a community renewed by the Spirit in a new covenant with God. And that new covenant was to be written on people's hearts instead of needing physical signs on their bodies. Instead, the visible sign would be how they lived in the world, the choices they made for their actions, how they showed God's love to each other. Let's think about what kind of community that makes when we show God's love to each other. And we live together as people who are forgiven with a chance to start again when we let go of anything that's come between us. But I wonder, for those of us who've been raised as Christians, how much we take God's forgiveness for granted. And sometimes maybe we even take advantage of that. Sometimes we might joke about it by saying it's easier to ask forgiveness later than ask permission now. That works maybe with your pastor and sometimes your spouse. But we need to invite God in before any decisions we make. On any given day, any of us might need to revisit our covenant with God, especially when we need strength and we need help for something we're facing that's overwhelming us. Looking back, I wonder what that first generation was like, raised under the weight of accumulated sin from everything bad that happened, that God's judgment had landed on them for. And suddenly, this new covenant is made, and the burden is lifted off of them. They'd been told that their sins caused destruction of cities and towns and the temple and their country and life as they knew it. And then came the message that God forgave them. Wow, what a huge weight lifted off of them. Their captors were then conquered by the Persians. And under the benevolent rule of the Persians, they were allowed to return home to rebuild what had been destroyed. So about 538 years before the Common Era, they were allowed to go back home. And they took God's forgiveness to heart and made the most of that opportunity. That generation of people in Judah knew the gift of God's forgiveness. So they rebuilt their lives and the temple and framed their culture around the temple. They established what we now call Second Temple Judaism. That's the temple that was built where Jesus was dedicated 538 years later, because it's his birth that started the Common Era we use for calendaring purposes today. So our Bible is the story of many people waiting for the Messiah, and then the good news of the Gospels when he arrived, and then the stories of spreading his teachings. How many people across those generations struggled with their faith and then found their way to following Jesus with their lives? Countless who got word about him to us today. So many of those people needed more than one attempt to sort out what they believed and how to live their faith. Just like us, who stumble off the path God points us to and we realize we make mistakes. Each and every one of us every day. Whether we like to admit it or not, that's part of all of our lives. I make mistakes on a daily basis. Some of them jump right out at you, others not so much. But all of us are in need of God's forgiveness. And we get to just name and claim that there comes a time to make a new covenant with God, as individuals or as a congregation, especially when we take on a new era for our ministry, which someday may be called the post-pandemic era, but I'm not sure we've got it named yet. Right, it could make any of us cry to think about that. It truly might. Yes, I agree. That girl's going to be a preacher someday, I can tell. Yes. But with that, we know that God promises to change our hearts and renew our spirits for what's next. Our lives will be a physical sign of the new covenant we enter into with God. And sometimes that sign will be our giving thanks for God's grace when we're forgiven for the mistakes we've made. Or the sign will be remembering when we were baptized and God's claim on us and how we live into that at each stage of our lives, looking a little bit different, whatever age we are. Or the sign will be the new ministries we create to meet the needs of the people around us. Ministries that God inspires us to that we couldn't have imagined on our own. Because always the time will come to make a new covenant with God, and may that stretch us to grow into the journey of walking as God's people together this day and in all the days to come. Amen. Amen.